Whether you're a trucker in Ottawa, an environment protester, or an elementary school student, sometimes it might feel like you don't have rights. Well, I'm here to say that you do have rights enshrined in the Canadian Constitution through the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Usually. But for now, you have rights. How and why do you have these rights? So Canada has had a history when it comes to the rights of their citizens. Canada started as a bicultural nation, which recognized the equality of French and English, Protestants and Catholics in each of the provinces. However, some Canadians haven't always had the same rights as others. Look at the Chinese head tax, a fixed charge for each Chinese person that came to Canada. The fact that women didn't get to vote until 1918 and Indigenous peoples didn't get full voting rights until 1960, residential schools, among many violations of rights by the Canadian government. Tommy Douglas, Canada's first NDP premier and Saskatchewan's longest serving premier, did not have amazing opinions about rights in Canada. Specifically, he supported eugenics, or the forced sterilization and segregation of people with subnormal intelligence or morality. However, after World War II, which was born out of hate and the dehumanization of a specific people group and people groups, and a period of time in which the Canadian government decided to put Japanese Canadians into internment camps for simply being Japanese, while Canada was fighting the Japanese in World War II, the NDP, or at the time CCF government, decided that Saskatchewan would be well served if there was a Bill of Rights to protect against racism and bigotry. This was still in a time in which Saskatchewan had segregated churches and hospitals, but in 1947, the Saskatchewan legislature passed the Saskatchewan Bill of Rights, which legally codified the rights of people that lived in Saskatchewan, regardless of class or race, including the right to vote, right to free expression, right from arbitrary imprisonment, and the right to join a union. This was the NDP after all. The Prime Minister in Ottawa from Saskatchewan had been inspired by the Saskatchewan Bill of Rights. John Diefenbaker made it a mission of his to pass a similar piece of legislation at a federal level, and on August 10, 1960, the Canadian Bill of Rights became law. And while this was a monumental step, this was not a constitutionally entrenched document, only a federal statute. It was for these reasons that the government of Pierre Trudeau explored the issue of civil rights again. Although Trudeau himself has a controversial legacy on civil rights because of his invocation of the War Measures Act following the October crisis in 1970, where the FLQ killed the Deputy Premier of Quebec, Pierre Trudeau sought and achieved major constitutional reform. In 1982, Queen Elizabeth came to Canada to sign the new, repatriated Canadian Constitution. Until then, the British Parliament had to amend Canada's Constitution for Canada, and the Canadian provinces had no say in constitutional reform. Not anymore. Included in the Constitution Act of 1812 was the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This was like the Bill of Rights, but more expansive and constitutionally entrenched. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms extends to all people in Canada, no exceptions, except when they aren't, which we will talk about towards the end. Canada's charter is actually divided into different groups of rights. I will use the rest of this video to explain what the sections are. Whereas, Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Reasonable limits. This clause says that the government can impose reasonable limits on charter rights as necessary to maintain a free and democratic society. The courts usually interpret this as there needs to be something important the government is trying to do, and the impairment of rights must be as minimal as possible. This is a frequently argued about section in the courts, which would take 10 minutes to explain in entirety, so I will only say very little about this section. But basically, this section stops the charter from being an absolute protection, because the court can still rule that it is okay for the government to violate the charter for the greater good. Now, what this greater good is, that is the thing that gets argued about. So now you understand why this is such a complex section and why I will be moving on. Fundamental freedoms. These are like the miscellaneous but yet really important rights that Canadians have. The rights in this section are the freedom of conscience, or to act upon your moral beliefs, and the freedom of religion, including the ability to worship and practice your religion. These things kind of go together. There's also the freedom of expression and thought, or to think and believe what you want, as long as it doesn't infringe on anyone else's rights. This includes the right to free press, which is a big deal in a free society, as it allows a diversity of news organizations, especially some who might not be very friendly to the government. Overall, this is just your right to express yourself and not be censored by the government. Finally, you are also given freedom of association and freedom of peaceful assembly. Democratic rights. All Canadian citizens above the age of 18 are given the right to vote in elections to the House of Commons every 5 years. Even though Canadian elections are usually a maximum of 4 years apart, technically an election doesn't have to happen for a maximum of 5 years. Canadian citizens above the age of 18 are also given the right to run in elections to the House of Commons and to provincial legislatures. It specifically states that an election may only be delayed in the event of war, invasion, or insurrection, when the MPs or legislature vote by 2/3 majority or more to delay the election. Mobility rights. This section gives Canadians the right to enter, remain in, or leave Canada. It gives all citizens or permanent residents the right to live in whichever province they desire and for free movement in between the provinces and the right to work in any province. Legal rights. This is the largest section of the Charter. It gives everyone the right to life, liberty, and the security of person. In more common sense terms, it guarantees one's legal rights and their personal autonomy and the right to privacy. Next is the freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. This is an expansion to the right to and the expectation of privacy. This is basically the "do you have a warrant" moment of the Charter. AKA, your property can't be searched without probable cause or a warrant. You also cannot be imprisoned or detained for arbitrary reasons. And when you are arrested, which you hopefully won't be, you have a right to be immediately informed as to why you are being arrested, and the right to be informed of your right to get a lawyer and legal advice about your situation, and to appear before a judge to determine whether your detainment is lawful or not. You have a right to a trial within a reasonable time and cannot be forced to testify at your own trial. You have the right to be considered innocent until proven guilty, have a reasonable bail set, and for serious charges, trial by a jury. You also cannot be charged under a law that was not in place when you committed the offense, nor can you be charged for something you have already been found not guilty of. You cannot be subject to cruel or unusual punishments, especially in consideration of the crime you have committed. Basically, you cannot be tortured for 20 years on end for stealing Skittles from Dollarama. If you don't understand the language you are being prosecuted in, and or you are deaf, you have the right to an interpreter as well. Equality rights. This is pretty straightforward. You have the right to be treated equally under the law regardless of your race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or any disabilities you have. This is just recognizing that all people in Canada are equal in the eyes of the law. This section also specifically protects affirmative action, or any programs that seek to improve the economic or other conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups from being considered a violation of this section. Official languages. This section confirms that English and French are Canada's official languages. All Canadians have the right to be served in both English and French by the government, to use English or French in all government proceedings, and basically, if you're dealing with the government, the right to be served or communicate in French or English, and the Parliament cannot pass any laws to the contrary of this. Enforcement. You have the right to apply to the court if you believe your charter rights are being violated, and the court may rectify things if they find your charter rights have been violated. This has been used a fair bit in recent years, and even been won a few times. Most notably were some of the Freedom Convoy protesters, many of whom have sought and won legal rectification after a court ruled that Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act on the protest was unconstitutional and violated charter rights. General rights. There are a few rights that don't fit in any of the above categories but still matter, and also address any technical issues with the document. One section is the rights of Indigenous peoples. It says that the rights in the Charter must not interfere with the rights of Indigenous peoples. For example, where Indigenous peoples are entitled to special benefits under treaties, other people who do not enjoy these benefits cannot argue that they have been denied the right to be treated equally under the Charter. This also protects the treaty rights of Indigenous peoples. Section 26 is a more technical section, which specifically states that this charter should not be taken to mean that there aren't any more rights Canadians enjoy under the laws that aren't the charter, just that the charter rights are the ones that cannot be simply legislated away by a law. Canada is officially recognized as the home of many cultural groups and should maintain and promote this concept, also called multiculturalism. The charter also states that it does not affect the operation of religious schools. This is an important one, as many Canadians today attend publicly funded Catholic schools, which is the main example of this clause being in effect. The Charter states how it applies to the territories in the same way as it does to the provinces of Canada. Finally, the Charter says that it does not affect power-sharing responsibilities laid out in the British North America Act of 1867, or as it was renamed to, the Constitution Act of 1867, and this power-sharing refers to the division of responsibilities between the provinces and the federal government. The application of the Charter. Section 32 explicitly states that the Charter only applies to the government, not to individuals, corporations, or businesses. Basically, the government can't pass any laws that violate equality rights, but businesses discriminating in hiring is not a violation of equality rights, although it would be illegal across Canada under other laws. The Charter also says that any laws, federal or provincial, that violate the Charter or the Constitution, of which the Charter is part of, may not take effect. If only a part of the law goes against the Constitution, only that part of the law is to be thrown out by the courts. Now, Section 33 is something that I will have to make another video about at some point, but the long and short is that this section gives the federal or provincial government the ability to pass a law that goes against fundamental, legal, or equality rights. The legislature must specifically state that a certain law is exempt from the Charter, and an exemption may only last a maximum of 5 years unless renewed. This exemption and situation is also called the notwithstanding clause. Wow, that is the end of this video, finally. Now that you know every single right that you have as a Canadian, I hope you will leave this video a like and subscribe as it helps me out a lot. But apart from that, have a good rest of your day and see you.